Working.
Let's see. Well, a lot of issues today. That's okay. We can roll.
But we're live now. Good evening. My name is Chris Duhart, and this is the Flint Public Health Youth Academy. Today, we're going to be having a New Perspective talk show. But before I start discussing our topic and everything like that, I wanted to start by kind of discussing kind of the temperature, the feeling that some of us have. Right now, we're going through a grieving period. One of our members who is very close to some people around her has suffered from, gun violence, and their lives have been lost. So this is a kind of like a fresh wound for us right now, as well as Hamady High School. They had to cancel their homecoming game now because of threats of gun violence. So this is kind of something that's really affecting our city right now, of course, our country as a whole. So part of the Youth Perspective Talk Show is giving the opportunity to express different opinions, ideas, and solutions that youth of the city of Flint might have. So that's what we want to do today. Our subject matter today is mainly based off of the cultural impacts of guns and violence that is happening in America currently, and kind of our opinions and how do we feel about that and what do we think contributes to it. So that being said, I'm joined by a couple of Flint Public Health Youth Academy mentors and interns here to kind of discuss these issues. I have a couple of questions that we want to go over, and that's basically it. So to start us off, one of the first questions I wanted to do to set the tone was, why do you believe guns and violence are prevalent in our country? And anybody can hop in as soon as they want to.
I think that if you just take it back to, when they were first introduced and you look at the history of our country, and all the other countries, guns have always been a part of wars and other conflicts, since they were created. So but I never would have guessed that it would still be a thing, especially in a world like we live in now where war isn't a common thing. And I don't say that to say that it doesn't exist, but it isn't common, with most of the people here being people who haven't experienced war. But that doesn't go to say that there aren't, people who are still alive today who have experienced and have seen the horrors and the outcomes that can come from, using guns to resolve a conflict. So it's very disheartening to see how we've evolved, where, at one point guns were used by whole countries to try and either protect themselves or for whatever reason, to now where, anybody anywhere can be a victim of violence from a gun or can inflict damage onto someone using a gun when that, was never the case in the past.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of why it's such a big deal, at least here in America, is, you're right, kind of that historical reference that is kind of one of those things that's tied towards freedom. It's how America came to exist in a way. But I see your hand is raised, Melody. Do you have something you'd like to add?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Melody Marsh. I'm a health science major at Howard University. And I just wanted to comment on the fact that I think the reason gun violence is so prevalent is because of normalization of it. We talked before about how gun violence is in TV shows, movies. Everywhere we go, we see some type of violence. So I think that really plays a strong role in the prevalency of gun violence.
I agree. I agree. But I want to even move further towards America in specific, because those type of things are in other countries as well. What do you think makes it way more prevalent that it's here in America instead of, like, let's say England or somewhere else like Japan? Cool, you can go.
It's glorified by the amendments. It's also kind of like a presumption of freedom because America, and because it's an amendment, it feels like it has more, oomph to it.
Right. I think I agree. It kind of has to do with those cornerstones of what makes of America. It's like, because it's been put in a document and we hold that high to such a high standard, there's this assumption that we can't be America without something like guns. Um, Melissa, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'd like to say that absolutely the amendment, the fact that it's in the law kind of gives people this idea, well, I can do what I want because it's written in law. But other countries also have gun protections and they go above and beyond written into law that yes, you may own a gun, but under these circumstances, and you have to do this and this. And there's things you need to do like you would a car to be able to handle something that could cause a lot of harm. So trainings and safety classes and things like that. I have friends in other countries that are just astonished that pretty much they feel like their perception of us is that we can roll up to any kind of corner store and go get a pop, a snack, and a gun. And it's not too far off. So yeah, other countries, while they do have guns, they're not as prevalent and easy to get as it seems like they are here.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of it has to do with how accessible these weapons are. And even within that, there are protections to go against it. I mean, it depends on what state you live in, but overall, as a country compared to other countries, it's way easier to get a gun here than in other places. Dr. DeVantine, I see that your hand is raised as well.
Hi, yes. One of the things I like to add, the accessibility of guns to other countries, they tend to have more stringent gun rules, laws, and penalties. Here, it's like you can go to the gun show and it's like cash and carry. There's no background check. You have a lot of ghost guns, a lot of guns, the face gun. You got a lot of guns trafficking. And one of the things that people may say, just like drugs into the country, guns into the country, is all about money, making a dollar. And that's what it seemed to be. So looking at it on a large scale, when we look at the amendment, the Second Amendment, it's not that anybody's trying to take their rights away, just that people that are utilizing, who are in possession of guns, they're not really focusing on the Second Amendment. This is like a guns for different purpose, not really to protect and defend your property and things like that. It's just like cash and carry, go to the gun shows, and it's like the Wild Wild West. And it's like when it's going to get to the point where we really lose all control of just walking outside in community every day. That becomes an issue.
Yeah, that's always been something that concerned me is gun shows, like how there's not really any limits or restrictions on them. I had friends growing up, or I'm not sure if I want to call them friends, but there were people in my school growing up where they were like, yeah, as soon as I turn 18, I'm immediately going to a gun show because the restrictions are different there. And I don't have to worry about things the same way I would have to normally get a gun. And that's kind of scary because we kind of live in a society and a country where we decide you're not allowed to drink alcohol at this age, but potentially it's possible for you to hold someone's life in your hands. So I'm going to go to Dr. Bailey next.
Yeah. Also, we have a lot of illegal guns that are illegal on the streets right now. And there seems to be no, in the community, a lot of people think that if I have a gun, it makes me look bigger and badder than what I actually am. I think one of the kids that we were talking to over the summer said they can't fight, so they have guns that is an extension of who they think they are, and that they can control situations because they have a gun. And that means that we haven't dealt with people's attitudes towards use of a gun, and the fact that if you use a gun on someone, you're going to maim them or kill them. And people just don't seem to be getting that guns kill, guns maim, guns hurt other people. And for a lot of kids, they don't realize that if you don't know how to really use the gun yourself, it can hurt you.
Yeah. I think something that's important that you said there is, it's really hard to talk about America as a country without considering some of the other things that interact with it. So, that being the socialization of patriarchy and toxic masculinity. So, when we think of, guns in general, it's this super masculine, machismo type thing where it's like, I'm becoming more of a man because I own this or because this is attached to me. And it can be used as a way to threaten people, but it can also be a way to like reinforce and influence the power that someone might already have. So that might be another aspect of why people feel so attached to their weapons. But I'm actually going to go to Jasmine. I'm going to go to you next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine. I'm one of the mentors for the Public Health Youth Academy. I think at the population level, gun violence may be so prevalent because of our history as a country and that fear that like some other country or some, colonizer might come in and invade us the way we've done to people indigenous to this land. And so that fear could be a driver. And then I would say at the individual level, I think about the fact that this is a country where our basic needs are not met. So people might rob you because they need to, they need to eat, they need to handle whatever they need to handle. And we don't have a country that people can comfortably live in, even though this is the richest country in the world. And I'm thinking about even, healthcare access, like because we don't have the proper, we're funneling money into quote unquote public safety, but we're not funneling money into the proper, preventative measures, making sure that people are able to manage their emotions so that they don't decide to pick up a gun when they get into a conflict and stuff like that. So I think there's so many reasons why it's so prevalent. But I see Seema, so I'm gonna let Seema add in a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Especially with the access to guns, because I live right down the street from a little gun pawn shop, and it's so easy to buy guns off of them as long as you trade something in. And then I know that there are people in different countries who don't want to come here because of the amount of violence that's going on. And it's like, it doesn't make us look good. It just doesn't make the whole, like, America's population look good, because everybody's like, oh, wow, a gun makes me look cool. Owning a gun will make me look cool. I know kids at my school that'll like, oh, right when, oh, my mama got a gun, I'm gonna borrow her gun or something. And I don't understand it because they hear all of these school shootings, and some kids think that it's funny to come in and make jokes about coming in and shooting up the school sometimes. My old school, somebody did that, and they had the police called on them. I don't understand why kids now think it's funny or think it's going to give them some type of popularity for scaring everyone in their school.
Yeah. I think because it's become so normalized, people feel the need to kind of make a joke out of it. But this is a very serious issue, so I totally could hear where you're coming from, Seema. That being said, we're referencing a lot of the historical relevance of firearms in our country, but that kind of makes me want to ask the next question. When do you guys think this started? Like, is this something that happened recently? Is this something that's kind of always been within us? Or, when would you guess this really started becoming an issue for us in this country? Go ahead, Seema.
I feel like it's always been an issue. It just grew over the years, because right after, people were always finding ways to trying to hurt people, all the way since, I don't even know. But after guns were invented, I guess they were being used on everything and everyone, whether it was just for practicing or they were like originally made for like protecting yourself. But when you have a gun, because people can change. So when you have a gun and over the years, you can change and you can use that gun for something else. So there's not really a way to predict what's going to happen or what that person may do with the gun in the future. So I think that the whole gun violence thing has been around for years, but it's just increasing every year as we go on.
Everett?
Yeah, 100% agree. I also think that the popularity and the growth of it actually comes from like the military and the governmental use of them. And you know that feeling like you were talking earlier, where people feel like they need to have the right to protect themselves from some foreign entity or from the government itself. So when everybody's realizing, hey, you know, the government has these guns, like we should be able to have them too. And again, it's a Second Amendment right. So now you got all these people going out, you know, buying guns and all this, you know, hoping and waiting for that one day where the government is gonna, you know, decide to cause an issue from it. And then also just, you know, the media, movies, TV show, music, like it's not a new thing for, you know, rappers to exist, or it's not a new thing for movies to exist where, you know, guns are in them and portrayed as these things that, you know, can, you know, do a lot of harm, but you know, you got people trick shotting with them, and you got people who are like, you know, you got the westerns. That was all about, you know, guns, who can shoot who the fastest. So
Mm.
I think a lot of it stems from, you know, the government and then also, you know, the media over the years.
Christian, did you have something to say? Uh, I'm going to move on to Mrs.
I think
Mays.
Christian's on mute.
Yeah, I'm going to move on to Melissa.
Yeah, I wanted to say what comes hand in hand with that, especially with exactly what Everett was talking about with the military and glorifying the weapons, the missiles, the explosions, and how cool and exciting that is. What they're also doing is dehumanizing what's on the other side of that bullet, what's on the other side of that explosion, and that's human lives. And I think as time's gone on and they have fantasized, they've created this huge image about you're stronger and tougher and you know, you're amazing with this accessory, and then it becomes a part of you. First, it was, you know, a weapon to survive, to fight against tyranny, to hunt, to do the things you need to survive. But then it becomes, through the media and through all of just the propaganda, it becomes this really cool accessory that you're not a man or you're not an American or a patriot unless you have one of these. And completely ignoring the fact that people are starving, like what Jasmine said. People are fighting for their lives, for the simplest of things that should not be a fight for. But then over here, if you get this explodey thing, you're cool. But let's not talk about or worry about what's on the other end of that explosion and that human life that's gone. And I think that we've done, the government has done a fantastic job of dehumanizing people that are different or that they can target as our next invaders or enemies.
Yeah. So a lot of what we've been talking about is militarization. And to me, I think one of the key factors is after all of these wars, it became way more depicted in everyday life, whether that be newspaper or around World War II when they started showing it before movies and things like that, where they would give news reports of, you know, the actual wars that are going on. I think the media representation definitely got stronger as time went on. And even when we think about movies and things like that, you know, at first the special effects can only be so good, but then they started to make them way more realistic. They started to make it way more believable. And I think that's one of the key differences as time progressed, is that it became way more commonplace, especially when you have big events like World War I and World War II, where this is, you know, grasping the whole world at this, you know, conflict now. This is not something that is just dismissible or things that don't happen in every day. It's, you're hearing about this, you know, in the newspaper. You know, you might know somebody who's been drafted, you know, all these different things. I think that's when, especially our country started to shift. That, and as well as the arms race, because that became even more of an American thing. Like, who can, you know, create these mass weapons of destruction and things like that. And so it became like part of America's identity, is that we have this willpower to, you know, create these different things. I want to go to Dr. Bailey next.
Yeah, one of the other things that I was looking at was the fact that social media, while it has been a way for us to identify with people on the other side of the world much quicker, it has also brought us together where before you may not have heard about a shooting someplace else. Now it brings it right close to you. And we have a lot of folks are copycatters. You know, they copy what they see someone else doing, And if they see someone else doing something that they think makes them look stronger and bigger and better, they want to do it as well. And then you have those folks, I think, that just don't, we've been so desensitized to it all, to death and dying. And it's just right prevalent. And when you have children who are saying at age 4 and age 5 that they have been exposed to gun violence or know about guns, that's something that in the past we did not do. And we're doing it now more often.
That's something I actually want to really hold on to, that last part. I'm actually going to ask a question around that, but I want to go to Cole first.
I'm gonna try to make this quick, but I feel like in like when like wars started getting broadcasted a little bit more. I mean, it was kind of always there, but fear sells. Fear I just continue a sentence without actually having an ending to it. But what I'm trying to say is it happened that later in the years where like, you know, the younger youth started becoming like ambivalent because I mean fear is everywhere. The promotion of things that kind of force you to be kind of scared. Be scared of your neighbor, you know, hate your neighbor and love your enemy. And just yeah.
That's one of the things that's really been bothering me nowadays with social media, how, you know, of course, a lot of these videos are banned now. There used to be like websites where people assess them more. But even when we look at, you know, police brutality and things like that, those footages and how they're so easily accessible now to whereas they weren't before. So you see that violence right in front of you. It's something that you feel connected to because it's visual now. It's not just something that you've heard, it's something that you see directly. And so I think that's been one of the biggest avenues recently that's really been impacting people. But what I want to get to that Dr. Bailey was starting to get towards is that people are exposed to these things young. So I want to ask you guys, like on a personal level, when do you think you were first exposed to violence, whether that be some form of media, if it's unfortunately at firsthand, when do you think you were first, you know, experiencing it, as well as how did that make you feel then, and how do you feel about it now? Go ahead, Cole.
Okay, so my dad had a Sega Genesis and he had Mortal Kombat on it. So some of the earliest times I saw it was watching, you know, Mortal Kombat, watching the fatalities, watching like the, you know, punches, the kicks, the all the sort. It was kind of to be seen as cool. The combat was kind of glorified to be cool. It's like, wow, did you see that freaking like just did like an uppercut and he fell into the acid? That's awesome. You know, you kind of get awesome in the sense of its glorification, not in the sense that it's actually cool because a fictional character just lost their freaking life. And if you kind of like overthink it, it's like freaking it is terrible. But what is this so different from the, you know, normal violence? I mean, this you get points and you win. I'm not trying to like downplay video games because in reality it's mostly about how your parents teach you to deal with those video games, but instead of the video games themselves being kind of the problem. Like how should their parents kind of tell them about like how guns are bad and why you shouldn't go ahead and kill another human for either like sport nowadays, really.
And I think part of that, what resonates with you when you're younger, is that it is fictional. It doesn't feel real. You know, there's still like a separation between it. So it's something that you can engage in and it'd be silly, it'd be fun because no one really is at harm. But that type of thing conditions us over time, especially when you get exposed to it often and often. And you mentioned Mortal Kombat in particular. That's a game where it gets very graphic. They zoom in and like, you know, get to the different parts of their body that are being broken and things like that. And so, you know, it's gamified. It is a game. And so it gets that dopamine. It makes you feel good. But what's not going on, like that we're not processing subconsciously, is that this is changing our view on these type of things. Now that we associate it with being cool, maybe now you feel like it's acceptable or you're more comfortable with things like that, or you might want to do some of these things. But I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to Everett.
Yeah, no, y'all really hit the point there because I think of it. I think of that whole situation as just a cog in the machine, on like the route to desensitize you. Because if I look back, I was 4 or 5 years old watching cartoons where people were getting beat up, blown up, ran over, playing video games where all the same stuff and more was happening. So I think that in a way, whether it was subconsciously or if it was a on purpose type of thing, it's just a machine that you put in when you're young to sort of desensitize you to some violence. And then the older and older you get, you say, "Oh, well, that's not that bad, or that's not that bad." And then you get to a point where you're like, "Wow, this is kind of crazy. Like, I can't believe I used to, you know, play these video games or watch these shows and with all this
Right.
like, crazy, horrendous violence." And you're just like, "Dang, I really didn't pick up on that when I was young, but now I'm older and I start to realize, the importance and the reality of the situation. It's like you can't just walk around uppercutting people. You
Yeah.
can't drive around running people over with your car. You can't be shooting people and shit. Like those aren't things that people do. But from the age of 3, 4, 5, all the way up to the 20s, a lot of people are in this zone where they're like still thinking that type of stuff is cool. So yeah, it's cool to go and watch, the new Fast and Furious where we jump in our car from building to building and we drifting through the streets. But then get your driver license, you actually get in the car the first time and you're like, dang, the people on Fast and Furious was crazy. Like these
Yeah.
people in Call of Duty is crazy. They out in the war and they shooting at these people. Like that stuff is very real. But then when you do it on a video game, it kind of puts you in a
Right.
mindset to be like, oh, this isn't as bad as they make it seem. It's not that. It's kind of funny to throw a grenade in a video game and then watch it blow up. But then it's people out in real life who are experiencing these things and getting levels of trauma that we could never imagine
Right.
from this same thing that we're doing on a video game or the same thing that we're watching a movie. Some people are experiencing them and it changes their life forever. So
Yeah.
I think it's just the whole thing is just a machine that takes your brain and it throws it through 100 loops. And then one day you wake up and you're like, dang, I can't believe all that.
Um, and so we have to interpret that in different ways, right? If we want to critically look at that, we have to look at it from one angle where we suggest why is it okay that we're becoming socialized and conditioned for this? Is this to prepare more people to do things like join the army, or is this a thing that's we're more comfortable now when we see these type of things happen in front of us? And you kind of have to ask, like, well, why was this necessary? That being said, me personally, I'm an enjoyer of all of these forms of media. I love action movies. I love video games and all these different things. And you get exposed to them so young and it's considered what's natural. But like you said, stepping outside of that game, seeing how it is in reality is a whole different picture. And I think that's something that we need to be more critical and talk about more is that, hey, why are we cool with showing, a 7-year-old this really gory thing? I mean, of course, they might list the movie as rated R, but it doesn't mean that you still can't find ways to go around that. We still do expose children to these different things. And like I said, even earlier with social media and the internet, it's even easier to do that now. Go ahead, Everett.
Yeah, and I'll even play devil's advocate for the other side because in a lot of ways, consuming this type of media can be beneficial. Some people can interpret it and take it down the wrong route, but then other people can interpret it and say, "Hey, I don't agree with this. I don't like this." And it can be good for some people to watch, to experience, and to know. Because I know people now who don't like guns, don't want to shoot guns, don't want to see guns, don't want to do anything with it. I know people who watch war movies and don't want to go to war, don't want to experience war. Like the idea of going to war and the idea of what was happening in Russia and Ukraine was sickening to them because of the things that they were conditioned to see and the things that wars and things like that are talked about in school. That's something that is taught. You know, and it doesn't necessarily go into the super gory, but it takes one Google search to realize the gravity of these wars and the gravity of these different conflicts. And it's not hard to expose yourself, like you were saying. Like it's not really hard to be exposed to this material. and it's not like anybody stopping you, but it can be beneficial to see these things so that you can know, hey, this is not a good thing. You know, a lot of these war movies, I feel like, are the purpose of them is to do two things. One, to, you know, tell you about the history, but then also to put a little fear in you, to make you say, hey, we don't really want to experience another war. We don't want to go through this again. You know, we shouldn't go through this again. And those type of things just, at least for me, because I am somebody who enjoys those movies and enjoys those video games. And I've never been motivated to go out and, you know, and reenact any of these things.
Right.
So I feel like I had to play the other side of that argument.
Well, of course, right. I'd like to say the same for myself. But that's kind of the thing is like, if we understand in our society that this, you know, showing these type of contents, exposing people to these things can have such a negative impact, you know, do you think that we should be more careful with it? Should we do it in different ways, or should we showcase, like how you said in some war movies, of course we're going to showcase it, but we're going to show that people have trauma attached to this. This is not superhero, you know, action guy. This is real people. And we go and actually talk to real people to get their stories instead of just making them up. Yeah, I think that's a key factor that has to be incorporated for us to, you know, truly identify and address these things in a proper way. Dr. Duvanzine?
All right, I agree, and I echo the sentiments that you and Everett had stated. And it's a difference when you're young and you watch these games, playing these video games. It doesn't really become a reality. But in hindsight, you have some communities where kids as young as 3 and 4 is actually shooting live ammo, and they're being trained to, you know, with live guns. And so I think they have really become desensitized much earlier, and it become more a realistic reality. Like, well, these bullets do maim, these bullets do hurt, but it put them in a different mindset versus a video game. So then for those who just watch it as a video game, and you know, just for fun, when they get older, they don't really resort back to that. They become more traumatized when it becomes more realistic, when it hits home, when it's in the community, when it's somebody that they really know. And I think that kind of differentiates their mindset of, oh wow, this is real, and it has really hit home. So I think one of the things is that when you have young kids exposed and have access and accessible to guns, actual guns, it's just put them in a different mindset. A lot of the shootings, the mass shootings is out here, a lot of the kids that have committed mass shooting did have these guns legally obtained, you know, for whatever means, whether they went into a show, a store and bought them, it was a family at home, but they're very knowledgeable and for the use of the gun and what their intent is when they go someplace to use it. So how do we stop it? I'm not quite sure how we stop it, because social media makes everything accessible. So once things become so much accessible, how can you really filter out what's real and what's not, and what kids, you know, it's hard to kind of blindside them for what they shouldn't be seeing. So.
Dr. Bailey?
Yeah, I think Cole has said something in the chat a little earlier about revenge use. And a lot of what we see in a lot of the mass shootings, especially the ones that get a lot of publications, are folks who are out for revenge. They feel that they have been harmed in some kind of way, and the only way that they can get peace or get whatever else they're looking for is to go out and hurt a whole bunch of other people. And, you know, we can say, you know, in the way we kind of speak with each other, we say that's sick, but that's someone who was never taught how to deal with their emotions and deal with how you resolve conflict. And maybe that's one of the places where we can start is teaching people when they're 4 and 5 and 3 and 4 that you don't hit Johnny to resolve the conflict, that there are other ways that you and Johnny can resolve your conflicts other than that. You teach your kids not to pick on the kids because they're different. Things that is very difficult as a parent sometimes to do, but it's still your responsibility to instill those things into your children so that they grow up realizing that I don't want to push anybody to the point where they actually feel like they got to get revenge.
Right.
And then they go out and spill that out on, not on me, but on somebody else that didn't even do anything to them.
Yeah. And I think that's it right there, is that one of the issues we have with our country is we don't like to address things like mental health until it's already too late, until there's already some type of form of issue. And then we might use it as a reason to give excuse or discern or things like that, but we don't necessarily improve on preventative methods. So I totally agree. I think, we should, teach children at young ages, like, hey, hitting someone doesn't solve this problem, but maybe talking about it will. But that being said, that's such a hard thing to teach and reinforce to children while our country as a whole is still kind of using that same type of behavior. When there's some type of issue that we have about resources or something in a different place, the first thing that we'll do is start a war or commit to violence or things like that. And a lot of people in our positions of power think it's okay and comfortable. So that being said, why do you guys think that violence seems to be an important or influential factor in this country? Seema?
Okay, first I wanted to add on to what you said about at a younger age that hitting somebody isn't gonna solve your problem. But then again, it's not our they're not being raised by us, they're being raised by their parents, so they're gonna feed off of what their parents do or say and how their family revolves around it. So if it's continuously happening in their family where instead of talking it out, they're arguing, yelling, and hitting each other, just because one person says something, they're not going to listen to that if it's not in their own household.
Right. Everett, you have your hands raised?
Yeah, and I agree. I think regardless to what people might think, I feel like violence is definitely a learned behavior. And whether that's you learned it from your family or you learned it from television or music, like it's definitely something that you learn because humans aren't, I want to say humans aren't inherently violent, but even past just your own household or just even past the media that you consume, because again, you think back over the years, violence is this constant thing. So when we have an issue when it comes to resources in the past, when we have issues that come to resources, the first thing they did was run the war. So now they prepping the nukes. So for me, it just makes me think that in order to like counteract the idea that that violence is that first nature, that first thing that we always run to, it has to be on a much larger scale. And that's not to say that we need to eliminate, things like media, and we don't need to eliminate history, but we need to educate people and say, hey, these are how things used to be done. That doesn't mean that that's how we need to move forward in the future. And I feel like that's the area where we keep getting stuck, where we keep, running back to violence because at least how I think of it is, when I was younger and somebody was bothering me and I wanted them to get out of my face, the quickest way to get them on my face, you know, was to be
Right.
violent. And
Right.
although that isn't a good thing, but that's something that I learned through, just living life because it wasn't just me, it wasn't just my family, it was the other people that I was around, people in my community. Like I remember back in elementary school, people were getting into fights. And like, what do you need to fight about in elementary school? We sit there, we color, we eat snacks, watch a little TV. Like, there's not much going on in elementary school to be fighting over. Yet, that's the first thing that people, run to when they have a conflict because there's people, who are adults who don't know how to have a conversation when it comes to conflict. And it could be the smallest thing. Somebody sat in your seat and you want to fight about that because you don't know how to say, hey, I was sitting there. I would appreciate it if you found somewhere else. Or even just saying to yourself, although that was my seat, there's 3 other seats in here that I can come sit in. So for me, that's like you kind of have to grow yourself out of that because,
Mm,
or have people in your life who are working towards that with you because it's become kind of inherent at this point because no matter where you look, violence is portrayed.
yeah.
So if you don't, work yourself and work actively to get away from that, you're always going to end up in the same situation. Somebody getting on your nerves, what you going to do? You know?
And I think you kind of answered your question within that at one point. You were like, what do we have to get upset about as, being in elementary school? It's kind of the same things that we do as adults. And that's kind of really sad to say. It's like, well, somebody took my crayons at home, or somebody took my fruit snacks. My resources are taken away from me. So now all of a sudden I need to do something to get them back. And it's really sad that we can't move past these type of things. And that's not to say that we can't solve these things in different ways. I don't want it to seem like it's only that we talk and be diplomatic and things like that. But the fact that we rely on violence so heavily, and how we almost don't care about how impactful it can be to, let's say, the victim or the victim's families or their friends and things like that, it's sad. Like, when we send off these people to war, that impacts so many different people, not just the person that's there physically, or who has left this country, but it impacts everyone who's home with them and the type of people that they're going against. And like someone mentioned it earlier in a talk show, in that process, we dehumanize our enemies. We almost make them seem like they're not doing the same things that we're doing. At the end of the day, we just want what's best for us in a lot of cases, and that's all they're trying to do as well. So there's got to be some type of way that we can find some type of compromise instead of just doing things like harming the other person. That being said, we kind of been reflecting on all these different things, and how this is like an intergenerational issue. The fact that some of our political leaders follow these type of behaviors, the fact that children in school follow these same behaviors. But there's been a recent presence that this is something that's specific to us, the people who are in Gen and Z, millennials, and younger. So do you guys think this is a particular issue? And I want this specifically for the interns. Do you guys think this is particularly an issue for us in our generation, or do you think this has always been a problem and then we're just seeing it more? Go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that this is an issue that's particular to us. However, I do believe that Gen Z and the generations coming find ourselves in that position more and more, where we're losing our resources. I feel like more so in the past couple of years, more than like this year itself, but we've been losing more and more, say over what happens, to us, to our generation, in the world we're living in, where a lot of the people who make the decisions are that older, generation. It makes it kind of hard when every single thing is being taken away from you, or you're not having access to other things, and it puts you in that sort of fight or flight mode. And I feel like that's where a lot of our generation is right now, where we're not able to, or finding the jobs that we need. We're not able to get the education at a rate that we need. So it puts us in this mode where we're like, well, if we can't get it the proper way, we're going to result to the alternative, which in most cases is some sort of violence or some sort of unlawful act. And I feel like that's the position that a lot of people in our generation keep finding themselves in. And that's not, our fault by necessarily. It's not our fault, but in a lot of ways, I feel like that's why our generation is seen as a little bit more violent, or seen as a little bit more agitated or aggressive, just because a lot of us are like, hey, y'all didn't took everything we had. Y'all keep trying to take stuff. So what else can we do?
Right. And I think it's a reflection of the kind of like what we're growing up within too. Like, each generation has different things that they grow through that help shape them. And a lot of the things that we've been exposed to, I think, have pushed us to these limits where we feel as if there's only certain ways to solve these things when there's obviously more. I want to add to that same question, and I'm going to come to you, Doctor. Do you think it's differently expressed by our age group, the violence that we do exhibit? Dr. DeDanzane?
Yes, I mean, I just want to just add on to something that Everett had said when we're talking about losing resources here and there. And it's going to be to the point where we're going to be here in a civil war because people are not going to be able to eat. They can't pay their bills. People being displaced. And a lot of these things, it's going to come to the point where is that this is going to either be you or me. So now we see it to the point where they're attacking the elderly, much older people They're taking advantage of them, and people just don't have jobs. And post-COVID, these things became even worse. So now I don't know if it's necessarily a particular generation, maybe the older generation maybe have a little more access, to these guns, and have a different view of far as survival, and they're becoming survival mode. But it's going to get to the point where, listen, it's going to be either you or me, and that's a bad, sad reality. But it's coming, and it's more prevalent in marginalized, disproportionate communities.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the difference in age groups and how it's presented is where it happens. I think that's one of the key differences, is that, in our age group, it might happen somewhere like a gas station, or, a place where normally it's supposed to be entertainment and fun, like a bowling alley. But that being said, it's still happening at a fast rate. And I think I agree with you both that a lot of it has to do with the issue of not having, in a lot of cases, or feeling as if something is being actively taken away from you. And that's what's really sad now, is they say that there's a generational difference in the fact that, like, older generations believed in fighting first. So if they were still going to do violence, but we're going to use our hands now. Whereas our generation might believe, well, why do I need to use my hands if I have this tool? The reality is, I think the stakes are different now. Like, because guns are so more popular, because they're so more available, and people are obtaining them in all these different ways, I think they're being used more often, but the same amount of violence is still happening. We just have way more resources to find out about them. Instead of just having the radio now, we have the internet, we have social media. But even within that, some of those accesses to those media also have goals within them. Like, when we go watch the news, there's so many different news stories that happen that day, but only so many can be chosen. And in a lot of cases, people tune into the ones that are more exciting or things like that. And a lot of the times, that's with people in our age range, unfortunately. And so then there comes this suggestion that our age range is specific and different, and things like that. And so, with all that being said, I want to start bringing us to a close. So this is going to be our final question. And it's kind of a big one, but you guys can find at whatever angle you guys want to take this from. But how do we push against this socialization? Dr. Bailey started to get towards it earlier with saying that maybe we need to focus on mental health, or how we're treating these people, or looking at these warning signs and things like that. But what do you think is a way that we can push against the socialization, things that we learn in school, the things that we see in our media, all that? So I could start us off. I think one of the immediate differences starts with the individual, right? Um, Part of socialization is recognizing what it is for what it is, if that makes sense. It works its best when you don't recognize what's going on. So when you see it, you have to start calling it out, and whether that be in your friend group, to your family, or whatever it may be, you gotta start suggesting, like, hey, there's a reason why this is being presented in front of us, and we don't actually think about it or comment on it. This might lead us to follow behaviors that we don't necessarily agree in. I'm gonna start off with you, Everett.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also think that we can attack it like mentally and culturally. Guns are a huge part of our culture, and that kind of alters the mentality when it comes to them. We talked about how easy it is to get guns, how it's common for a lot of people to have them, and then you also have this mentality from the culture that's saying, "Hey, I could shoot this person, or I could shoot this and shoot that," and it's just become such a regular thing that a lot of people don't realize the gravity behind pulling the trigger until it's already done. We see it constantly where we get these people on trial after they done, shot and killed somebody, and they're just so apologetic, and they're, disgusted with themselves because, after the deed has already been done, they realize the gravity behind it. And I feel like a lot of that is because of what the culture, does to your mental. You know, if you're watching all these movies of people getting shot at and you're hearing all these songs and you know you're seeing it all on social media, it doesn't put you in a mindset to say, hey, that's probably not how it goes down. And then you find yourself in a situation where you're the person, you know, pulling the trigger and you don't realize the gravity behind that. You don't realize how, you know, damaging that can truly be until it's already done. And you see it over and over. And like I see constant videos coming across on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram of all these people who have killed people using a gun or shot at people using the gun. They're like, I've never understood what people were saying to me until I actually did it. And I've realized, hey, you know, this is a lot more than just, you know, shooting at somebody and that's not the end of the sentence. There's a lot more that comes after that.
Um, I agree. I think a different aspect about it is, you know, it's never fun to talk about it anymore. It's kind of gone out of style, but the type of people that we put in positions of power and the type of beliefs that they believe in, I think have also resonated with this heavily. You know, it's obviously there's political avenues to this, saying like, you know, picking someone who might be a little bit more tighter on gun control and restrictions and things like that. But I think it also has to do with, you know, comfort level. Like, do these people who help represent us, do they also suggest they actually care about that weight that you just described, Everett? Do they just want it out there just to have it out there, and things like that? Dr. Duranzane?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, sometime when we look at these things, situations when people use these, you know, utilizing these guns, the consequences are different. Okay, we have consequences are different for different groups, different cultures, different laws seem to apply to different people. So we gotta look at the totality when we're trying to tackle this issue. Who would we change these laws for? You know, why the laws are so different in other places? Is that because someone that may don a uniform has more rights to take someone's life under certain circumstances versus someone on the street that doesn't? It's a big difference with a judicial system when you go for someone that may be of color, not of color, that they go in front of a judge and the consequences and the sentences and the repercussions are different. So when we look
Right.
about tackling the whole gun issue, we got to look at the whole policy arrangement that's evolved around it as well.
Right. And you know, now that you mentioned that, that's an interesting aspect because when we think about that stereotype of the action hero, they normally look like a certain demographic of person. And that demographic normally, because maybe it's because we're exposed to them more often, we're suggesting that it's okay, or at least more okay, for them to be in these type of positions and to make these type of decisions in these scenarios, whereas everyone else, that's not necessarily okay. And so I think you're right. The way that we, you know, morally and critically analyze these situations about if this is a good thing or not, is totally different based off of who is the person who's holding that weapon. Dr. Bailey?
Yeah, I think one of the other things that we have to also take a look at is the economics of guns, period.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people make a lot of money off of guns, whether they're sold legally or illegally. A lot of money is to be had there. And sometimes we'll trade the money for the life. And we have to somehow bring those two together so that folks understand that you're making a dollar or you're making more money off of somebody else's life. And then when it comes to our politicians, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who's being bribed to do what, but somebody's being bribed not to do their job because their job is to develop laws that govern us. And sometimes it's the simplest of things, such as just doing a background check, just making sure that you're not getting guns into the hands of people who already have demonstrated that they have mental health issues. Just, you know, parents know that they have children that are mentally disturbed and don't have any place to go to actually deal with those issues. And so you've got somebody out there that everybody knows is a loose cannon. And all it's going to take is just one strange, crazy thing to happen, and this person's off. And nobody wants to take the first move to actually put this person in the place where they need to be. And if they did, do we have the resources to actually deal with that? So money has become a real issue in this whole issue, this whole crisis.
Yeah, it definitely has. And even within that, when we talk about political figures, there have been political figures recently who have experienced a form of tragedy, and they totally go back on some of the things that they've said. But I fear that it shouldn't have to get to that point. It shouldn't have to get to the point where you have these types of experiences where it becomes this big of an issue for us to actually do something, because in a lot of cases that's too late now. And I think that's one of the angles that, I feel is the overall sentiment is that we're worried and afraid that these things will continue happening. Unless we do something now, they will continue to keep happening. Like I said earlier during the show, this is a fresh room for some of us members of VIA. And that being said, it's not that we don't condone or we disregard the ability to have a firearm, or that we believe that no one should have it. It's the fact that this has to be handled in a more responsible way to stop these things from happening. We shouldn't be getting new yearly highs of gun violence incidents every year. That shouldn't be something that goes up. And if it is something that goes up, we need to start doing something to stop it. But all that being said, does anybody else have any last remarks? I don't think I see anyone. That being said, I'm going to wrap this up. This has been the Flint Public Health Youth Academy, the Youth Talk, the Youth Perspective Talk Show. Thank you for watching. You can continue watching this every week, every other Friday on our Facebook at the Flint Public Health Youth Academy, or on our YouTube. You can catch the past recordings at FPHYA 810. We truly appreciate you guys for tuning in. This is an issue that we've been talking about for a little while now, and we're going to continue addressing these things in the future. Thank you. See you guys later.
Good night.